Welcome to Doing, Being, Thinking, dialectical behavior therapy skills for making a life worth living. I'm your host, Eric Nykamp, a therapist and clinical director at the Grand Rapids campus of Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services, a mental health practice with campuses throughout the great state of Michigan. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Doing, Being, Thinking, a podcast exploring the what, when, and how of using dialectical behavior therapy skills for making a life worth living. My name's Eric. I'm a DBT therapist and one of the clinical directors at Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the options for solving any problem, which is something that we go over in pre-treatment with people. Joining me today is Dr. Agnew, the founder of Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services. It's good to have you here today.
Thanks, Eric. It's good to be here. I love talking about DBT.
Oh, yeah. And we're going to have fun with this because today, when we're talking about the options for solving any problem, we're going to get to just share some stories and have a conversation about this thing that really is one of these really useful pieces of information that DBT gives us. So let's start out just talking about what are the options for solving any problem.
It's funny that we're talking about that today because I have a few concerns, or we could call them problems, that are happening personally. And this topic is a good reminder that I have four options.
Oh my gosh.
I get to choose what my option is going to be. And that is, I can solve the problem. So if it's possible to solve it, then I can choose to solve the problem. And I can choose to feel better about the problem. If I can't solve it, I can decide, do I want to feel better about the problem? Do I want to manage my emotions about that? Or if I want to tolerate the problem, or if I want to stay miserable. And that's the one that always cracks me up, is that I actually have the option of staying miserable. You know, am I going to do something about it? Am I going to tolerate it? Am I going to feel better about it, or stay miserable?
I know. I also like choice 4, stay miserable. I think it's a little tongue in cheek when they talk about that being an option. But, you know, if I'm being truthful, some of the time I am choosing number 4. It's sort of like that definition of insanity, where it's like if you do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different outcome, you know, it's going to drive you crazy.
Yes.
Well, sometimes we do that before we realize that's what we're doing.
Yes. Yes.
Or maybe we do it and we know we're doing it, but we're just not ready to take one of the other options up yet. So
I think of it as times when I just want to take a long time and vent about the problem. So that's my way of justifying it at times, is that I just need a little more time to vent about it. But that really is true. Sometimes we do need time to just vent about it before we can even move into, do I want to feel better about the problem? You know, or do I want to stay miserable and just keep venting, going over and over and over when the situation is not going to change?
Right. Yeah. So when would we want to use the options for solving any problem in real life? What are some things that either, you know, we've done in our own lives, or things that maybe our clients have told us about when we decided, like, oh, hey, let's look at the options for solving any problem as a roadmap?
There's so many times when we have an option to solve a problem. It could be if we're thinking about taking a job. Do you want to take that job? Is that the job that you want to take? Do you want to move? Sometimes it's if a job requires that you have to move and leave friends and family, or that it's a new industry, or it could be an interpersonal problem. It could be a problem with others, someone in your circle that you're struggling with, and do you want to solve that problem? Do you want to solve the conflict? It could be problem solving with what car do you buy, if you can even afford to buy a car. There's just so many things that come up on a daily basis that I think we don't even always think about it because we can solve that problem so quickly.
Mhm.
Um, which shirt do I wear to work? That doesn't even seem like it's a problem because that's just easy. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to wear that one. It's when it's a problem and we feel some pain or some push pull, some type of struggle with it, that it's like, oh, I'm going to need to pull out my four options here.
I love this page when either it's me or it's somebody that I'm working with when they walk in the door and they're like, Eric, you've got to help me. I'm so stuck right now, or I'm so frustrated right now. And I think a lot of times people they'll walk in my office sometimes and they're hoping that what we're going to do is we're going to do some problem solving together. That's kind of what they want. I want to figure out with another human being, and I think sometimes they're imagining that I'm like this very well balanced human being, which most of the time I show up in the world that way. But I'm also
Uh-huh.
a real person, and that like me not being in the situation with them, we're going to be able to put our heads together and we're going to do number one, we're going to solve the problem. And then I'll ask people these four questions about number one, because I think most of us want to solve problems.
Right.
And like, do you have the time to solve the problem? Do you have the
Mhm.
knowledge to solve the problem? And do you have the resources to solve the problem? And one of those resources might be this fourth thing, which is influence. Like, do you have the influence to solve the problem? And if there's a no on any of those, we might not be able to do number one, which is
Mhm.
sometimes why we feel stuck.
Right.
But then to have this helpful reminder literally written down in a book that says, you've got three other options here.
Right.
When you are stuck, you could choose to feel better. And sometimes people are like, I can't feel better about it. Like I'm feeling mad, or I'm feeling so sad about this, or I'm feeling alarmed. Oh my gosh. Like, right? Our brains
Mhm.
do that. And to think about it, like, well, what would I need to do to feel differently or accept or tolerate something? Like, how would you just tolerate it? Maybe you feel like I plugged the hole in my boat and I'm keeping it from sinking, but in order to keep my finger on the hole, I can't be rowing at the same time.
Right.
So I got to accept it. Like I got to literally wait for somebody else to come down the river, or I need to wait till I drift towards the shore, or I got to wait for time to pass. Or I could keep doing what I'm doing.
Hmm. We have options,
We've got options.
and that is empowering all by itself.
Yeah.
As I said, just even in my own personal life, the fact that I have options makes me feel better all by itself.
Yeah. So, how do we use this skill? How have you used it in your life or with clients?
Um, in different ways, and it really, again, it varies based on the situation. Like the steps are the same, but the level of intensity or urgency, or as you said, when you think about, do you have the time, the knowledge, the resources, those type of things to change the problem that you're feeling, and or the problem that's happening. And when it's things related to like grief and loss, how do you handle that?
Mm.
Well, obviously I can't magically bring someone back, so I can't solve that, what that feels like as a problem. But in day-to-day things, feeling better about the problem It's a part of what helps me feel better is just even knowing. And I try and empower clients is just in knowing that you have options means that you don't have to be stuck. And you can decide, even if you want to vent, how long do you want to stay in venting? Because there's the component with tolerating the problem, there's the radical acceptance that you have to accept that the problem, it is what it is. And no matter how much we try and say, what if, I find when clients are in the but, and it's how did you get that case of the buts?
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Because that's not going to change anything. And I think that that is a great way to see when we are in accepting reality or not. But isn't going to change anything. It is what it is right now, whether I like it or not, whether you as client like it or not, it is what it is. And now what do we do? And so we can choose to feel better about it. And when we can't feel better about it, because let's face it, there are some situations that we can't feel better about.
That's right.
That no matter, I can use all of the emotion regulation skills, and I can use please, and I can do I can do all kinds of things to regulate my emotions that will help me manage, but it's more of tolerating, because some things you can't feel better about, that you're not going to be okay with. But you can be okay even though you don't feel okay with the situation. So I don't know if that makes
good.
sense.
I feel like somebody needs to hear that this morning. Yeah. I think of this, I've seen people use, in some ways, this is like a decision tree.
Mhm.
And there's kind of like beginning of the race things that people worry about, which a lot of times is like, I do or say this thing over and over and over. And that's the reason I'm coming in for treatment. And if I could just figure out how not to do or say this thing that makes it worse, then I'm going to feel like like I got some traction here. It's like, okay, I just need to get out in front of it.
Yes.
And there's those initial things, right, that we come in for treatment, like, wow, I'm not yelling at people I love as much anymore, or I'm not being called into my boss's office and being written up, or I'm not doing this impulsive thing to, hurt my body or my relationships that's making it worse. And that's like that initial traction of getting out in front of the first problem that we're thinking about. But then there's finishing the race problems, which is like, okay, so now you're building this life worth living and you realize, my gosh, there's these other things, right? Like my mood just pushes me to do something else. Or there's a new problem that shows up in my life that, oh my goodness, I didn't see that one coming,
Right.
out
Right.
from behind, here comes this new thing. Like, what am I going to do? Same emotions fire up. And it's like, now what do I do? What do I do now? Like for me, it would be like my car breaks down and, I'm in the middle of the street somewhere, and that nobody wants that to happen. But here I am, me and my moods and my unmoving car. What am I going to do?
Right.
And here it is. Here are these 4 helpful things. And sometimes it's this decision tree that helps people zero in on their longer work. Like, what's the longer work I need to do outside of my initial problem behavior that's going to get me through the rest of the race of my life so that I can finish well?
I love that you said that. You said, I feel like someone needs to hear that this morning. It's like, oh, huh. I wonder if that someone is me. Because it is a reminder that sometimes we're in it for the long game. We want to solve problems right away. We want it short term. And sometimes when we can't solve the problem, it really may be a long haul
Hmm.
solve the problem or long haul option of whether we're going to feel better about the problem or tolerate the problem or stay miserable with the problem because it can't be resolved quickly. And and it's so important to get through it without making it worse. And so that means I have to be mindful, I have to be intentional. And yes, I might get blindsided by an emotion. It's just life. We might get blindsided by an emotion, or we may think, like, whoa, I'm doing well. I'm out ahead of it and off I'm going. And something happens that triggers it or brings it back up or puts it right at your forefront. And then you have to decide all over again. Because now my problem is, am I going to choose to stay ahead of this or not? Am I going to choose to stay skillful or not? Am I going to choose to feel better or not? Am I going to choose to tolerate it or am I going to be miserable? Like that the options keep presenting themselves each step along the way.
Hmm. Hmm. I have conversations with people in my office on a fairly regular basis where they might have a diversity characteristic that society feels a certain way about, or a subset of society feels a certain way about. And one of the problems is it shouldn't be like this.
Hmm.
And that thought, and the thing is, I agree. I absolutely think the world should not be like this.
And
And the world is not get like we cannot change the whole world, right? We can't we can't change the words that people we don't know say, things that people write on social media, unkind, like all the levels of unkind, from just, you kind of think like, well, they're well intentioned, but they hurt my feelings, to like, they're absolutely horrible, rotten people. And noticing that this is probably not a problem that's going to necessarily go away in my lifetime,
right.
not the way I want it to. How do we respond to those kind of problems? Like you were talking about the case of the butts.
Hmm.
Mine that I hear sometimes is the it shouldn't be's.
Yes. Yes. It's like you're correct. You're preaching to the choir. I agree with you. It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't
And,
be.
and it is.
It is.
And now what are we going to do about it? I,
Yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
that just brings up so many thoughts of, even in parenting and some issues that, my kids have experienced. And it's like, it shouldn't be that way. And it is. And because it is, we now have some decisions to make.
Mhm. Which I think is this really interesting thing, is that we can get through these incredibly difficult things skillfully, even in situations where things don't change, or don't change as much as we wish it would change.
Mhm.
And this is a roadmap.
Yes. Yes. And you can stay on the road or you can choose to get off. I think of the staying miserable is sort of like inviting everyone to your pity party, and we decide we're all going to go sit in the garden and eat worms. Okay, we can. I'm first off, don't invite me to that party, and I'm not going to sit in the garden and eat worms. But we can. However, I have some better options, and I choose to do differently.
Yeah. I love what they say about point 4, about staying miserable. It says, or possibly make it worse. Which, if you kind of look at the mirror image of that, is that it's possible to stay miserable and not make it worse.
Yes.
And if you can at least know, like, okay, right now, like you said, venting. Okay, I want to vent. I know it's not going to help me solve a problem. It's not going to make me feel any better. It's not going to make me tolerate it. Like, I might actually notice that my emotions are going up instead of down.
Mhm.
And I'm going to work on doing some damage control or some harm reduction. So maybe I'm going to stay miserable, but I'm going to try to stay miserable less.
Yes. Yes.
And it's kind of like mini miserable instead of maximally miserable.
hmm And it does make a difference.
It does.
It's empowering, and I almost think of it as, in some ways, that's can be skillful all by itself,
Yeah.
because staying miserable does not have to mean that it's in the pits of despair miserable, where you can't eat, drink, sleep, function. It can mean that. It can. You can have that level of intensity, but it doesn't always have to be a level 10 intensity of miserable. It can be your level 3 of
Yeah.
miserable, where it's like it's going to be mini miserable because I just want to walk around and have an attitude about this. It could be about social injustices or something that, you know what, you just want to walk around with a chip on your shoulder for a minute. And it's just your mini miserable versus your level 10 miserable.
Yeah. Well, what might get in the way of using the options for solving any problem? I know we've hinted at them, but let's be a little explicit for a minute.
Some of the things that you said right from the beginning can get in the way of solving a problem, just from the off the bat, solving the problem. And those were the things that you said were like resources. If you don't have the resources, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the time, you don't have the influence. Those were great things that you mentioned that can get in the way, because if I don't know how to be skillful, no matter how much I don't want to make things worse, I may make them worse. Because if I haven't ever been taught, or if my emotions have gotten too escalated and I haven't been skillful, then I don't have the resources there for me to even problem solve or to recognize how to do this differently. And so that might mean I'll be miserable at a level 10. And sometimes I think it's easy for others to be judgmental about someone who is at a level 10 and not even realize that that person really might be doing the best that they can with what they have in that moment. Like, they don't have those things. And it can be frustrating to not have the influence. Maybe you have the skills, you have the knowledge, you even have the resources, but you don't have the influence to make that problem different or change. That can really be frustrating. And I think something that gets in the way is flat out choosing not to be skillful.
Yeah.
Just point blank, I know I'm not being skillful. I know I'm making it worse, and so be it.
I
But
don't
there's
want to.
consequences.
Yeah. For me, when I talk with clients, and I see this in myself too, there's the I don't want to, and there's the I forgot that this is there.
Right.
Forgetting that there are four options. Probably in these instances, if they're like me, because this is absolutely me, either my emotions are super intense right now, or I've got one solution in mind and I'm just being stubborn that, like, I want number one
hmm
and I forget.
Right.
So I think forgetting it's there, for me, like I'm a sticky note guy. Like if this is a page in the book, if you're in that DBT manual and you're taking DBT and you're like, oh, you're right, I forget this. Put a sticky note on the page so it sticks out. Because I tell you what, it's really helpful to reference this when you feel like you're at your wit's end and to just be like, oh yeah, there's the roadmap again. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the bottom of the page, it literally lists what skills, in some ways, it's like, what chapters in the book should you turn to polish up your skills now that you know where you are on this roadmap?
Yes.
And here's where you go next. If you ever did those choose your own adventure books or whatever, it's like, okay, turn to page whatever, and this will get you a different ending to your story, more likely.
Right. And that is important to know that I can have a different ending to my story. I maybe can't pick the ending that I want, especially if I can't solve the problem.
Yep.
However, I don't have to settle for whatever ending just happens to come my way. And it's by following the roadmap that I get to start having I can be strategic and I can arrive at a destination, maybe not the one that I would have chosen, but one that I can be okay with.
Yeah.
At least until I can do something different.
Yep.
And I like that I want to have the option to later do something differently and to continue on that journey versus I have burned every bridge or I've ruined a bunch of relationships or, if I would have had options later, I've now made it impossible to get to those options because of the decisions that I made way back at the beginning of it.
I feel like that answers the question I was going to ask you is like, how does this skill make us have a life worth living? I think that's it, right? We get the option to have some different endings to the story. Maybe it's not the ending we imagined, but it's a better ending than if we stayed miserable.
Right.
Yeah.
Reminder to self.
So we hope that this episode helps you understand a bit more about the options for solving any problem. It can take a lifetime to master any skill, and with practice, it's going to get progressively easier over time. So we hope that all of you continue doing, being, and thinking in wise ways on your way to making a life worth living. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening. Doing, Being, Thinking is an educational podcast about dialectical behavior therapy and is not intended as a substitute for therapy. This is a podcast outreach of Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services, offering both in-person and telehealth therapy to children, teens, and adults throughout Michigan. If you are a Michigan resident and want to get started with therapy, including DBT, children's DBT, or other evidence-based therapies, please contact us at 616-719-0194 or find us on the web at www.adolescentfamilybhs.com.